Great. Hello and welcome to Learn to the Breaks, second Hubchat of our Joining the Dots series. My name is Julian Payne, and the focus of today's Hubchat is all about tax breaks. Could they help the independent music sector, and if so, how? So tax breaks are not new. They've been around for a long time in the theatre, well, in the games world and in the film world, and more recently in the theatre world. But it's timely for us to be talking about it this week because the government this week issued its response to the orchestra tax break consultation, and that news came in, I think, on Tuesday or Wednesday this week. And obviously it's really appropriate for us to be talking about it because Joining the Dots is all about exploring new financial models that might help make the independent music sector more viable. So we've got a great lineup, one of whom isn't here yet, so you'll see somebody enter stage left any minute. But we've also got some amazing video content that I wanted to tell you about. So we have content from interviews from Mark Pemberton at the ABO, Julian Bird from UK Theatre, Mike Weatherly MP, or former MP as of yesterday, and Horace Trubridge from the Musicians Union, all of whom I met up with over the last couple of weeks, who had loads of really intelligent, really interesting stuff to say about tax rates. So I would urge you to have a look at that. All of those interviews are, if you're watching live, in the sidebar of the Hangout, and if you're not watching live, you can view those on our YouTube channel, the Hub Music. So today's lineup, on my right is Gavin Sharp, who is Chief Exec of Inner City Music.
That's right.
And a member of Ever the Second.
Oh gosh, yes.
Relevant to today.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And to my left is Sean Egan, who is our legal eagle for today.
Hello.
And I've been describing him as our go-to man for all the things that we need to know about tax breaks. And then joining us, actually, it's a bit like one of the election debates, isn't it? We've empty-chaired Mark Davyd from the Music Venue Trust, who is just, as we speak, hopefully arriving from Mayor of London's Music Summit. So, sorry, he's not here to join us. But, so today's question is all about if and how tax breaks could help producers, venues, musicians working in independent music. Sean, I wanted to ask you to kick us off. My logic or reason for wanting to do this Hubchat was because I first raised the issue of tax breaks back in December at a Music Venues Trust Day, Venues Day, and I must admit to a degree of ignorance when I kind of rather give people my hand up and ask Mike Weatherly in response to his question about tell us what you think the government might be able to do for the independent music sector, and I just asked him about the likelihood of introducing tax breaks for venues and bands. And it sort of gathered up a head of steam, didn't it? It became the thing that everybody was talking about. And then over the months I realised that actually everybody's default position is tax breaks, wow, golden egg. We definitely want some of those. Everybody else has got them, we want them. But I'm not sure how many people actually really understand what the fundamentals of tax breaks are. So I wondered if you could sort of do a 2-minute idiot's guide to tax breaks.
I think we need to go back to the film tax breaks. 10 or 20 years they've been in place, and they were much more generous in the past. And there was a sense in which they were too generous, and that the current arrangement we have is a less generous but still valuable tax break. And it's presented as a means of encouraging activity. So it's for the creation costs. You get a portion of those creation costs back. And the whole principle behind it is it doesn't affect distribution, it doesn't affect the onward exploitation, but it's about the creation, the idea that you're going to get more product out into the market, which will be good for the economy, be good for the creative status of the UK in the world, and will generate more revenue for the Treasury. So we're now at a stage where these creative tax breaks are coming through thick and fast in a way that we had to wait so many years for any engagement with Treasury, and now to have George Osborne in particular leading the way is very good news. But I think that from a theatre point of view, the amount that will be seen to come in through the theatre tax relief will not equate to the cuts in grant aid over this Parliament for the arts. So I think we do need to get it in perspective.
So that's that concern that lots of people in the arts have been talking about, that any additional sort of financial impact, input that the government wants to sort of develop should be in addition to grant aid rather than instead of this gradual sort of eroding away of grant and aid.
It's definitely a philosophical approach. Some people like grant aid, some people don't like it.
Yeah.
And we're seeing in an environment where the government does not particularly like it and would rather reward people for spending money and activity rather than actually allocating sums of money to people in the belief that they will create good art.
And could you just, because it's so new, could you just give us maybe 30 seconds on the orchestra tax?
Right.
Consultation?
I mean, it's really a misnomer. It shouldn't be called the orchestra tax relief anymore because it's not limited to orchestral bands. It's any group of 12 or more musicians who are presenting touring performances. But they do have to constitute themselves as a limited company, or whoever is producing performances does, in order to access this tax relief. It can be accessed by charities as well as non-charities. It's nothing to do with the content as long as you are not rock or pop.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
I suspect we'll come back to that one. So I mentioned earlier the videos that we'd made earlier in the week. Oh, hello Mark.
Hi.
We empty-chaired you earlier. You
No.
were David Cameron.
With David Cameron for 5
minutes.
minutes. So.
Yeah.
That's
So
now
thank
good. Shouldn't do the description.
Anyway, but I went to see Mark and Julian earlier this week, and asked them. One of the things I asked them was for their advice for anybody working in independent music, what advice they would give to us in light of their experience of working on the consultations that they've been through. And they had some fundamentals that they wanted to share with us to make sure that the debate was informed. One of which was, I know that you're going to come back on this, Sean, but was around the idea of tax breaks being about sort of market failure and there to incentivise growth, enable growth to happen, and also being a way of increasing investment into art happening. And the fundamental thing being that they are there, as you were saying, to support the production of new work, so commissions, those sorts of things, the creation of new work, rather than just the moving around of that work or the distribution and presentation of that work. So as an example, it would be about the commission, but not about the performance. The other thing that really came through from what they were saying to me was that there's always, the way that it's worked is it's almost been like a sort of conveyor belt. So the shape, if you like, of tax breaks was defined by how production and distribution worked in the film industry. And then because theatre kind of could fit into the same model, it was really easy to extend it to that. And then in order for the orchestra wanted it to work, they had to kind of fit it into those shapes as well. So if we are going to get anything in the independent music sector, we have to be thinking along those same lines. They have to be able to pick it up and drop it in, and they have to really, really understand what it is and isn't about. It has to be very clearly defined from a legislative point of view. So for instance, theatre is all about people playing a role. It can't be a poet just standing up and performing, I don't think. It can be circus, but so I wondered about the poet thing this morning, I assumed it couldn't, but so there are very clear definitions that exist in law. So I wanted to ask you, knowing what you know and hearing what you've heard from the interviews today, what you think, what your thoughts are about tax breaks and how they could help. So Gavin, probably wearing two hats, I think.
Yes, and interestingly excluded under both. So, you know, I suppose the model is very much within theatre that you have producing theatres and receiving theatres. Producing theatres are given the task to commission and create and imagine new works. There is a wonderful utopian world where perhaps something similar could be funded within the UK. And we talk about the fact that to some extent we do that. We do get people together and get them to create new work and then do tours. Got DJ Yoda going out at the moment. His Breakfast Champions project came out of a project that we ran at ours. Now, getting the Arts Council to understand that that is how we are operating, and they are 250 metres round the corner from us and know us really well, has been in itself a massive challenge. And we are on a little bit, yeah, because we're not funded to do that, particularly. We just kind of do it. But most music venues, as Mark will probably tell you later, are much more cultural spaces that facilitate young people, creatives, musicians, to showcase and present their work. So largely, they just don't fit into that. We almost fit into it in some respects sometimes, but are we ever going to be able to convince anyone? Certainly, I can't see how we would fit into it under any of the legislature that's either proposed or currently in existence. But for me, it's just the same activity, but we are not going to get.
So where are your artists at? So thinking about this
Yes.
from an artist's point of view, can you see a way in which bands could organise themselves in order to be eligible?
Okay, well again, the reality is that the current project that I'm in the midst of started out as an interesting idea and has now blossomed into something much bigger, is, and we have got some support off the Arts Council, but most definitely under the 15 grand threshold. We were quite clear about that. So it's quite restrictive in terms of the finances that are there, but we are doing 15 festivals. There's 8 of us, and just making the things stack up with 8 is a big enough challenge, and therefore the leap to go into 12, I think would be difficult. Apart from, of course, it's the same thing in terms of perception. I suppose if I do go away and employ another 4 musicians and add a string section into it, do I suddenly become eligible for relief? I suppose I probably do.
And we talked before about.
In fact, I might do it.
We talked before about the fact that in order to be eligible for it, you have to be a legal entity as well, and about how many bands actually are legal entities in that sense.
Well, and they're not. Largely the structure is, again, it's historical, isn't it? It tends to be a person who has an idea, who surrounds himself with other musicians, and it's effectively operates, or certainly this is my understanding, that you're acting as a partnership, or it's a sole trader with subcontractees. It's one of those two things. But it's very rarely constituted as, I am a musical creative, and therefore I am going to set myself up as a limited company and just hire. Some people do it, but in our sector, can you think of anyone? Very few and far between, isn't it? It's just not how it's done.
It's not at the grassroots level, I think that's a big issue.
Yeah. And so going back to sort of the venue thinking, because I was explaining before that the kind of the kick-off point for this debate was really me putting my hand up at venues day and asking Mike, and then the room kind of like tax breaks. So what about your views on tax breaks?
How long have you got?
4 minutes.
Okay, that's good. The issue is that I think there is an emerging argument. We're talking about market failure. There's a very clear market failure at the grassroots sector level. You can see it with the closures of venues. I've just come from the Mayor of London's Music Venue Task Force meeting. The immediate outcome from that is that there is a identifiable and quantifiable drop-off in the number of music venues in London. Yeah. To a high degree. Yeah. We're talking about 36% decline over 8 years. Yeah. And that is driven by a number of different factors to do with the perception of, in our opinion, the perception that they've not been seen as cultural spaces in the way that other parts of the sector have. Once you get to that point, you start looking at what you could do that would actually support that grassroots music sector. And I was very drawn to the tax break as thing on Venues Day. I have to say that at this point, I'm not quite as convinced. I'm highly in favour of tax breaks, don't get me wrong. I think actually the music industry has a good cultural argument for tax breaks. However, would they really impact at the grassroots music thing, where we can definitely say there's a market failure? And I'm not as convinced at all, if I'm honest.
Sean, what's your take on
that? Coming from seeing the theatre tax break go all the way through consultation and change during consultation, and see the orchestra tax break change during consultation, and see the ways in which there was a willingness to bring it through, but there's also nervousness, because we've seen this in the recent press. Politically, it's very, there's lots of banana skins. So we've had the, that you're not giving tax breaks to brass bands and pipe bands. And so, understandably, the Treasury are very cautious about this. So they would need to put a tax break together where they were not going to be subject to those sorts of catcalls. And that's quite difficult, because it seems to me that the music industry, almost more than the theatre industry, is totally integrated, and you can't separate out one deserving element from another. And so they all operate on largely the same basis, but they just focus on different areas because that's the desire to promote that sort of music. Perhaps that's wrong.
I'm going to disagree.
Okay.
I think there is a clear argument emerging that the grassroots music venues are specifically cultural spaces that perform a part of the cultural function that is similar to art centres and theatres, much more than the rest of the music industry. And I'm not just saying that because I'm the CEO of the Music Industry Trust. I've worked in the music industry. I think what you do point towards there, though, is that I don't think the music industry collectively would be able to argue a kind of cultural parity of methodology and operation that in any way currently reflects what happens in the film and theatre industry. And that would be my problem with, as you say, the banana skins that are on their path.
Is that because we can't organise, or because it's not true?
I think it's because we have a very very aggressively capitalist version of cultural profiteering within the music industry, which is fine because it's worked over a number of years. But we keep talking about market failure, and I think where we're actually seeing a particular sector of that industry that does pretty much all the research and development for live music, certainly, and we're looking at where are those festival headlines going to come from. If we want a top tier that really is able to pluck those talents out and to make money out of them, to export them, to make all this money we keep hearing about, do we have a model whereby the grassroots activity is rewarded for that work that it does? And we don't.
Can I just pick up one thing which I think is very interesting, which is why the tax break came in to theatre fairly easily, which is it applied irrespective of scale. And I think that what you're looking for is support at a particular scale, not at the higher scale. And I think the philosophy behind the tax break is you give the same percentage however many people come to see the particular performance. And that really goes against the philosophy of the tax break.
And I think that's why I'm not completely against the concept of the tax break. I think there's a very deserving case here, but I think it's quite complex. I think it really does relate in the way that it does with theatre. It relates to risk taking, and once you start asking about risk taking, you have to ask who's taking the risks. And actually, I'll just do 30 seconds. I have this incredibly brilliant concept for a video in which Ed Sheeran stands next to Wembley Stadium on the night before he plays his 3 sold-out shows, and he's got a guitar case and it's full of £50 notes. And every venue in the country at a grassroots level that's lost £50 or £100 walks up and takes their £50 or £100 back, and Ed shakes them by the hand. We put that on YouTube so that everybody can understand that Ed Sheeran can play 3 nights at Wembley Stadium because all those promoters believed him enough to hand him £50 and lose £50 and £100. How do we do that within our industry? We don't do it at all. And can we achieve it through a tax break? I'm not sure.
So that is almost like it was scripted, which actually it wasn't. But when I went to see Horace Trubridge from the Musicians Union last week, he was very enthusiastic about the development of the orchestra tax break. Thought that was a great idea. but was also fairly sceptical about the value that tax breaks could have for music venues and musicians. His opening line being, well, they don't really earn enough for a tax break to be very meaningful. But he very quickly started to talk to me about the other financial measures that he thought could have an impact for independent music. And he talked about business rate concessions. He talked about something that I know that you're very keen about, Mark, the PRS tariffs, about the reduction in particular of the minimum one, which is £37 at the moment, regardless of whether you've got 200 or 200 people there, that sort of thing. And he also, which picks up on the point you made, I think what I think will be taken to be very controversial, to me it seems eminently logical, which is that people who benefit from the R&D that goes on in small-scale venues and should reinvest in it. So promoters and agents and record labels should reinvest. And it occurred to me, maybe rightly or wrongly, that there are measures that the government has introduced around sort of social investment, where there is actually a vehicle that people could do that if they chose to.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could pursue some of those.
Yes, I mean, the beauty about the tax breaks we've been talking about are that they are effectively free money. They're like a subsidy, but they are not dispersed by an organisation such as the Arts Council. There are a number of other measures in place which are encouraging people to invest in certain sorts of activity. The Enterprise Investment Scheme and the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme are very notable. And there is also a measure which is coming under the radar, which is the Social Investment Tax Relief, which is more flexible than the EIS and SEIS schemes, but can benefit organisations such as charities and community interest companies who are doing activity which is for the benefit of the community. And this allows you to offer 30% tax breaks to investors, so they get a reduction on their income tax, and for qualifying loans, debentures, and they have to put their money in for 3 years, and you can raise up, as each social enterprise can raise up to about £250,000 at a time. Now, that's great, but you have to take on the loan. Now, you don't have to guarantee repayment, but what is really advantageous about the tax breaks we're talking about is there's no repayment. This is free money. And I don't see too many arts organisations wanting to take on additional obligations. Now, the social investment tax relief is sufficiently flexible that you don't have to do that. But I think before we go too far down the line saying tax is the answer, it's generally predicated on the basis of getting something back for the tax relief rather than it just being a gift to the organisation.
Yeah, and it is a gift, isn't it, the tax break, because it doesn't even require the organisation to be paying corporation tax money to be able to claim it back. So really it's like double free money.
And that's why I see it as not so much tax, but as a different approach to providing money to the arts sector in the context of a landscape where the grant support for the arts has been substantially reduced.
I just think it's worth re-emphasising that, so that people know that even if they are a charity, which is what you're saying, and they have a trading subsidiary, and that trading subsidiary gives any surpluses over to the charity, which is therefore exempt from corporation tax, that in fact they can still put the claim in for the amount that they would have had to pay. And
it's better than that. The charity can make the application itself,
as
long as the charity is a limited company.
So I suppose in some ways, Mark and I briefly started talking about this. Probably the first step for our kind of small venues, cultural spaces, is for them to really start thinking about what we do, which is set up a charitable non-profit community interest company arm through which they can put the music promotions, and that can sit separately from the commercial company, which is the trading, can actually be the trading subsidiary or sit completely separately. And so the bar business goes through that, the ticket revenues go through that, and then that opens up all the different opportunities that might come through that.
Yes.
Sure, anything that you would add to that?
I mean, I think that organisations which as a whole are making substantial profits, it's not terribly helpful to set up a charitable arm.
No.
The charity...
None of those are.
Exactly, that's my point. And so it's a way of, I think the charity theme is quite a good one, because you have to pass muster with the Charity Commission to keep your registration as a charity. You must be working for the public benefit. You must be doing things that are supporting the arts or education or those other sorts of charitable objects. So I think that is a valuable way of identifying what is of value to the community. What we're talking about, these creative sector tax reliefs, are nothing to do with that. They're a completely different philosophy. I'm not knocking them, but they don't fill the hole, and they're focused on different areas. I mean, my personal belief is that the commercial theatre sector will earn much more from this tax break than the subsidised sector will, even though many of the worldwide hits have been originated by the subsidised sector.
Yeah. And the theatre tax break scheme is different, isn't it? Because it does allow commercial and subsidised.
It applies to both, but that's why it originated in film, where there is no subsidised sector. And so it's been modified to work for the subsidised sector in theatre. And that's why we're getting the orchestra tax relief is another development, taking it a little bit further a different line. But every sector has a different makeup, and it's complicated. And certainly music is, I think, extremely complicated.
I was going to pick up on both those points that Gavin made. There is there's an individual localised approach which venues themselves can take, which I think you're talking about. And I think what you've indicated there is another approach that we're very interested in, which is that we need to define these grassroots music venues and the work that they do much more accurately and really talk about them as collective. Well, once you've done that, you can start asking for the work that they're doing to be recognised by government and with a legal framework that's appropriate. I think the idea that any individual venue that's a member of the Music Venues Alliance or works with us in the Trust might decide to open a charitable arm is great. But collectively, what I'd really like to see is government and local authorities really recognising what these are already and designing responses to the market failure that they have, so that actually we don't ask them all to leap through hoops and start doing all these things. And that's what's kind of happened with different sectors of when we create community interest companies and these kind of things, that they've been built in response to a clearly defined message of what's required. So our work really, with respect, I think you're right, it would be great if more of them went down that route. But before we even get there as Music Venue Trust, doing a big campaign to turn these all into charity art, charitable arts and everything, we really want to clarify the message and say, have you looked at this sector? What could be designed as a company model, as a structure model that you would recognise? What can we say about their work? And then what can be done for that? I feel, if I'm honest, without being too funny, this tax breaks argument that it currently exists is a little bit ahead of that. It's kind of saying, can I get a tax break?
Yeah.
And then you say, well, okay, you can, but for cultural parity reasons, the theatre takes a lot of responsibility for the people who work in progression groups and everything. I'm sure music industry does that. And I kind of wonder if you give them the tax break, will it make them do it? Or do they just want a tax break because it sounds nice? It's kind of the question.
I think the issue about commercial versus subsidised is quite an interesting one, because your organisation is funded regularly by the Arts Council.
Yeah.
You operate in a very commercial fashion, and that mixed economy is really, really crucial.
Yeah.
So it's not. I suppose the same is true of the National Theatre, which is part of the subsidised sector. But I'm just thinking that it's very muddy for music, isn't it? Because venues operate with very sort of mixed economies. And I'm just wondering that even if we self-organise and begin to describe ourselves, whether there is just too much muddiness in the way that a venue operates. So, for instance, I've heard repeatedly over the last couple of weeks that the government is not going to invest in rock and pop because they think it is commercial. And so Mark was saying that when they did the orchestra consultation, they kept repeatedly hearing, we're not going to give Coldplay a tax break. So apparently what was the kind of the shorthand for it.
Well, they've already given one to take that.
So I just wonder, in terms of venues, you know, they've got different kinds of music every night, different kinds of deals being done. It's just, you know, it's very complicated.
I agree, but I don't think it's impossible to describe it with clarity and say, look, the functions of this, this, and this. And in fact, we're working on a 6-point document. And the number one, I'm all in favour of evidence and research and backed up arguments. I think it's the thing to do. But the number one item on our 6-point list is the elephant test. Does it look like a music venue? If you went out to a kid in the street with a guitar and asked him where he wants to play, he'll tell you the name of the music venue almost immediately. I mean, actually every city and town in the whole of the UK has got one. These are aspirational places for people to go and play. They take massive amounts of risk, which they expect no return on, really. We're fortunate to have in the UK around about 200 insane people who want to do this and are really passionate about it. And all we need to do is just create market conditions in which they can do that. And I don't think, I know it sounds terribly, you know, vision-driven and huge. I don't think it's that difficult. You know, to be honest, I think it will be very easy. There is currently a discussion around rate relief for newspapers. Now, newspapers are the most aggressively capitalists, you know, market, but we recognise there's a market failure there, and a simple way to respond to that is to just say, let's give them rate relief. I think that's going to go through.
Sure.
I personally take a view that if it's not done in time, once you've lost these venues, you will never get them back.
Yeah.
And that is what we're seeing in the arts. In the next 4 years, there is going to be more austerity. We will lose the capacity that we've had and built up over decades. And it sounds as though there's a mirror potentially happening for different reasons, but it's still happening with the smaller music venues. And I think unless the voting public cherish these things more, they will lose them and regret them afterwards.
Are there other financial measures, Mark, that you've been thinking about that you think could help?
Definitely. Rate relief is an obvious one.
Yeah.
I'll leave out specifics, but there are venues in London that are paying over £50,000 a year in business rates to run under 300 capacity venues. It just makes no sense.
No.
It's done. We think there are some, as you mentioned, the PRS. I mean, the minimum fee, I understand how it emerged, but at this point, it's a tax on risk-taking.
Yeah.
Why put on somebody who's going to pull 10 people, even if you think they're brilliant, for £5 a ticket, if actually £37 of that is going for PRS, that's 74% of the door going for PRS. It's not sustainable. We need to do something about that. Our actual overall opinion is that the first thing we can do, because I hesitate to go, he's not typical. He's a little bit too informed. He's got too many knows too much. But I mean, actually, typically they are quite good little businessmen in their own little field. So actually, just take the pressure off them. You know, I mean, if you reduce the cost of renewing the license because we stop describing, just been in the mayor's meeting, in their own thing it says when you're doing this, blah blah blah, blah nuisance. Take that out. You know, if you stop telling licensing officers it's a nuisance and you tell them it's a really valued cultural space, then the licensing process will be reduced massively. And Aura from the village I'm going to they have 76 conditions on their license. It's a ridiculous amount of red tape. They're trying to generate new music and really act in what is obviously a culturally significant way. Just give them a little bit of space to do it. After that, your question was about it's in a circle of decline, as you were describing. It's in the offer is getting worse. Ticket prices go down because the offer is worse. There's less money, so the quality goes down. And we need to create what I would describe as like a virtuous circle, where we put investment in, the quality of the offer goes up, the ticket price goes up, the value of the experience goes up, people feel more comfortable, go there with their families, and they want to be involved in the music venue, and that will create something. We're not asking for millions of pounds from government, but there are some things they should do. Disabled access to venues is outrageous.
You raised something around VAT earlier.
Well, we all pay VAT on our tickets. I mean, it's just a quick thing, really. There are various mechanisms for dealing with VAT. Certainly, when you go into a museum or gallery these days, you know, they'll actually say, is this a donation? Do you want to gift aid it? And of course, those things again, they're just not available to music venues. As soon as the bandman walks in and sees you trying to pull that, that you're pulling a scam. Whereas, you know, you can go into the main art gallery in town and everyone thinks it's perfectly reasonable, because that's a valid cultural activity, and what we're doing isn't. And it's that simple. And so those kind of perceptions.
I think it's really important when talking about tax and tax breaks to realise the limitations as to what tax changes can be made, and the way in which there are limitations on government. So, for instance, there's something called state aid, which prevents support by a government giving an unfair competitive edge to one organisation over another.
Yeah.
And also, we'd all love VAT on cultural performances to be reduced or removed, but the VAT regime in Europe is such that you cannot unilaterally do that. That would be the easiest. People have campaigned for years and years, and probably the reason why we're having this conversation is because that's just not possible within the current regime.
It's one of the UK cultural policy.
No, absolutely. Well, to some extent, even if you say this is the value of the VAT going into the system, and you pay it in, and then somehow there's a measure, measure, because the Arts Council certainly never asked us how much VAT we would pay on tickets. They don't use it as a measure. Never have, and perhaps the government or the Treasury will kind of look at that in another mechanism for putting money back in.
We do actually have an example of Europe where they can't try to unify the VAT rate. In Spain, they unified the IVA range and equivalent VAT, and they put up to 21% and 4%. And there was a complete market meltdown, and now they've reduced it back down to 10%. It is impossible to do that. I accept what you're saying, but I think the question is what you said about really about parity.
Yes.
I'm drawn because I'm passionate about music. You notice that? But I'm drawn to the idea that they're special and they need special treatment. Even before we get there, I would simply like them to be put in that box next to the art gallery.
Absolutely.
Taken out of that box next to the licensed premises and just put over there.
Absolutely.
And then I'd like to walk into a local authority and say, do you know what? I've had a look at your cultural plan and it mentions everything else except your live music venue. There was a thing in Brighton this week where Mark Stacker's very successfully managed to get Brighton Council on board and take a look at what's happened to their music venues. That's fantastic. Yeah. But go on to their website.
Yeah.
What's on Brighton doesn't contain any music venues. I mean, Brighton is a music city. I mean, it's weird, to be honest.
It's remarkable. I'm going to get this in before we finish. But in Manchester, we have another theatre. I won't name it. I like it. I'm a regular. I go there. I love it. Who attract almost exactly the same number as us. They're effectively on the inner ring road as we are. They're a theatre. They develop programs for young people as we do. They're almost exactly the same, except they are a theatre and we are a music venue. And yes, we do everything right, and we're not for profit. We're constituted as a charity and we do draw down funds. The theatre, exactly the same, draws down 8 times the funding. Not 80% more, not 50%. 800% more. That's just from the Arts Council. They probably draw down, I don't know, I'm not going to say how much they draw down from the City Council, but again, considerably more. They will be on 10 times the value. And that is fundamentally the problem, is that culturally we are not regarded as valuable or making it as valuable a contribution to the cultural sector as theatres, classical music. And it's fundamentally, it's a historic class-driven perception.
And you see that every time. I mean, I can always tell when I'm at an arts conference rather than a music conference because I don't know anyone there, because everybody else there is from the theatre or from the gallery. So, you might be there sometimes.
Yes, I'll be there sometimes. But I do, of course, what we've gone on to the Arts Council. And really, what we're talking about is tax breaks, which is supposed to is even. It's an even.
And I wanted to bring back. You were talking about local government. So I sort of seamlessly want to try and move into the election and to a more general sort of philosophical, political sort of discussion. So those of you that follow the sort of Westminster sort of machine will know that Mike Weatherly has been a long time a champion of the music industry. Was up until yesterday the Tory MP for Hove. So I went to talk to him last week about tax breaks and whether he thought they were a great idea, and you can see that video on our YouTube channel. But he talked to me, we had quite a long chat about can we make any difference by lobbying? Should we be trying? Should we be talking to our politicians? And he was absolutely insistent that we should. And he had a really interesting point to make, which was that actually politicians of any political hue are desperate to meet more people. And that venues have a brilliant opportunity to enable them to do that. And that actually what all venues up and down the country should be doing is finding out who their MP is, inviting them along and getting them to come and talk to people and see what they're doing, which might go some way to sort of changing some of the political views. So with that sort of ringing in my ear, I wanted to ask you, with the election being 6 weeks away, and us having seen the first of the TV programs last night, if you were standing in front of any of the candidates, now your local MP, and you were asking them for one killer thing that you would like the next government, regardless of whether it's Tory, Labour, whatever it is, one killer issue that you would like the next government to address for the music industry, what that killer issue would be. Gavin, I'm going to start with you. Go that way.
So it's reinvest VAT back in. The VAT that we pay on tickets, reinvest it back in to the cultural sector, to the organisations that pay it.
I'm going to go with something a little bit more restrained because it's something that's achievable, which is put the tax relief money back into grant support. That will, I think, will create more of the activity that we want to see.
Agent of change.
Do you want to just elaborate on that?
Yeah, there's a curious part of British law where music is noise, noise is a nuisance, and therefore music is a nuisance. You should break that cycle. There's a key principle called agent of change, which means that if you move next to something, it's your job to manage the change that you've affected. If you want to build flats next to a theatre or a music venue, you can certainly build those flats, but you need to manage it in a way that won't impact on the culture that still exists. Agent of change is quite a key element of getting that kind of reduction of what's happening to music venues around the country under control. Got too many flats being built next to them, and whatever everybody thinks, venues haven't got £5,000 to £10,000 to have an argument about it. Yeah. That will shut them down. So just give them the principle in law, and at that point it's the developers probably try and argue about it rather than the music venues.
So, and mine, I feel like I should have one as well. I wanted to reference the Arts Index, which came out a couple of weeks ago, and which you can get on the Guardian website. It's produced by the National Campaign for the Arts. So I guess my ask would be, well, I started off by saying it would be about maintaining current levels of arts funding, and Gavin told me I should say increase current levels of arts funding, so that would be mine. And I just wanted to finish with, there's a brilliant quote in the introduction to the Arts Index from Sam West, who's the chair of the NCA, and he says, when this country introduced the NHS and the Arts Council in the 1940s, it was broke, but the money was found. And those two organisations remain proud examples of what can be done with political will.
Well, yes. And Keynesian economics, I mean, the whole point of it was reinvest in it, and it grows the economy, which we have seen to be a success.
So I think on that note, I want to sort of draw the discussion to a close. And thank you all for coming. Thank you also to the people that I went to interview for giving up their time. Thank you to Kings for hosting us in this lovely room. Thank you to James for managing all the techie stuff, and thank you to all our funders. If you've enjoyed this and you want to see some of the other content that we're producing, then it's all available on our YouTube channel, which is the Hub Music. If you want to comment on anything, if you want to get in touch with us, then you can follow us on Twitter and get in touch with us that way with tweets at the Hub. And also, if you would like to just be kept up to date, and if you'd like to be part of the discussion, then do join our community of the curious and the generous by going to our website, thehubuk.com, and you can click on the join up sign, and then that will mean that you get the chance to engage in everything that we do. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you.